Hello, I'm Tony Lloyd, and with me is the one and only Anthony Cherry. Welcome to the interview.
Thank you.
Here's your amazing book that I have read just about, which is a bit of a feat actually for me because I don't read books because I don't have time.
Okay.
But here it is, Crumpled Trumpet, my Radio Times. And there's so much in this book and so many stories in the book. I'm going to have to read it again because I can't remember some of the stories. You know, it's almost like a reference book. It's incredible. So why is it called Crumpled Trumpet for start off?
Well, I wish I hadn't called it Crumpled Trumpet, actually, because Crumpled Trumpet is really quite difficult to say. But it's called Crumpled Trumpet because when I was a kid, I was learning to play the trumpet, and I finished a practice session and I did what you should never do with the trumpet, which is I put it on the table on its bell. And then I got up from the practice session and I nudged the table, and the trumpet just went woof, head over heels, and hit on the floor and crumpled the bell up like this. Okay. And as a kid, I thought, you know, oh my God, I borrowed this instrument from my teacher, and I tried to pull it apart, you know, like those top hats that used to squish. And of course it wouldn't. Anyway, in distress, I went to my mother and she said, well, you're going to have to fess up. You're going to have to go to your teacher and tell him, which I did. And when I got there in fear and trembling, he didn't scream and shout. He just took a filial from the top of a banister. You know those things that looked like an acorn made of wood. Had red paint on it, flaky. And he took that off the top of the banister, covered it with a cloth, and shoved it up the bell. Put another piece of cloth round the bell, and then took a hammer and started to tink and dink, a bit like a car panel. Out. And I was so impressed with. I say in the book, it was a lesson for life. Instead of being really cross, he was very kind. And also it was, you know, things can go wrong and they can go wrong quickly. But if you tink and dink your way out of it, you know, that's the way to approach it. So that's why it's called Crumpled Trumpet.
Bit by bit. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. That's a great title. Now I'm going to read a bit of the prologue from the book. It says that Crumpled Trumpet takes us from Anthony's experience of broadcasting national events like the Falklands War and the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, to the inside story of directing and working with countless presenters, singers, musicians and actors, including a Hollywood star Dirk Bogarde, for heaven's sake, legendary actress Glenda Jackson, pop superstar Gary Barlow, and chat show king. That's difficult for me to say.
That's difficult to say as well, yes.
So Michael Parkinson, of course. So you've basically worked with so many people in your BBC career, which I find fascinating. That's probably, and how you handled all those different people and those different events and everything is what, to me, makes the book fascinating. But I'm an audio engineer and broadcaster as well. Never worked for the BBC. But your stories about editing tapes and everything takes me back, because that's how I learned how to edit in those days, on spools of tape with a razor blade and a Chinograph pencil. And you were the same, weren't you?
I know. I think people find it extraordinary that it sounds so primitive, doesn't it? A razor blade, a Chinograph, and actual magnetic tape. But we didn't think it was that. And it was, you could be incredibly fast. I mean, I got really fast at editing like that. And you developed skills like everything else. You know, in order to keep the piece of tape the right way up, if you ended up with it on the floor, you marked the Chinograph on the bottom half of that tape, so that there was no danger of you putting it in back to front.
The wrong way up.
And I used to know people who used to edit in Bush House with a pair of scissors. There's a guy called Simon Fernie, and he had a pair of like nail scissors, but they were brass, which he used to flip into his hand and then flip out again. And make cuts in the tape. Now, the fantastic thing was when you looked at the cuts, which were supposed to be all at 45 degrees, they were all over the place, but it did still work.
Fantastic. Why did he feel he needed to write this book?
There came a point where, so I worked for a long time for Friday Night's Music Night. Friday Night's Music Night, big orchestral show, 60-piece orchestra in big professional theatres like the London Coliseum or the Palladium. And there came a point where I had left because of the COVID pandemic and because budgets were getting slashed and all the rest of it. And all of a sudden, Friday Night's Music Night was at that point going out bizarrely on Sunday night, called Sunday Night's Music Night, and it just was cancelled. It just disappeared. There was no fanfare, no announcement about it at all. And I was, Paul Gamacini took over the slot with a record show. And I was really cross about it. I just thought, all the work of all of those people, 60-piece orchestra, the singers, the conductors, the arrangers, the copyists, all of it gone.
Right,
Not a whisper of an announcement. So I thought, before too long, I didn't want it to become like some great dinosaur that people would sometime, later down the way discover that this thing had existed and thought, how on earth did it manage to survive? So I decided I was going to write about it, and that's why I just didn't want all the work of all of those people to simply be forgotten, evaporate.
Did you feel insecure at the time then, with things just being cancelled and disappearing at the time? I mean, that must have made you worry for your job.
I'd gone. By that time, I'd gone.
Okay.
So COVID happened, and the reason I left was that they kept reducing the budget. And although I tried very hard to counter that by charging for tickets and trying to get sponsorship and all of those things, there comes a point where you just can't do it. And then COVID happened, and I was getting, although I am ever young, I was getting that bit older, and I thought, do you know what, now is the time to go.
Right.
And so I started to plan to go to become a freelancer.
Yeah.
So I'd left, and then it just disappeared.
Yeah. So your timing was probably about right.
Well, I do think that to some extent we had the best of it. I think all the people who were working on those shows. I mean, the irony is that about 8 months later, it reappeared on Radio 3, and that was good news. But it's not the show it was. Because their money hasn't improved, so they can't go to the big theatres. They don't do Hyde Park. They do a thing called Radio 2 in the park, but basically that's the bands, existing bands.
Yeah, pop bands.
So I think you're right. I think to some extent there was that period where you could put a 60-piece orchestra on the stage in the Palladium with great West End artists and have something really quite special.
Yeah. Tell me about the singers on Friday night, It's Music Night. There was the Stephen Hill singers, wasn't it, to start with?
Well, the beginnings of my doing concerts were, I was producing David Jacobs' record show, and that's all about the Great American Songbook. And after a while of being, this is very early on in my BBC career, I realised that there was no reason why I couldn't do a live version of that show. Because at that point we had two orchestras, we had the A Orchestra and we had the Concert Orchestra.
Wow.
And they were BBC staff, so you could just employ them.
Yeah.
And we also had the Golders Green Hippodrome as a venue.
Yeah.
So we could employ that. We haven't spent any money at all so far.
Yeah.
So then you think, well, where's the music going to come from? Well, we had an in-house library with the arrangements, and we had arrangers in-house. So the only cost you've really got was the cost of your singer.
Yeah.
So I can remember going to Derek Mills, who was the assistant head at that time, and trying to convince him that this would be a good idea, and he said yes, it would. And once I did that first one, and it was a Judy Garland concert, and there was an actress called Leslie Mackey around who had done an award-winning show about Judy Garland. So you go, okay, if she'll do it, and of course she would do it. We used to go out at lunchtime.
Yeah.
So now you're sort of beginning to set the pattern for what those Friday nights would be.
Okay.
It's West End stars or stars that have a name.
Yes.
With an orchestra, and that, if you're a singer, that's a great attraction, isn't it?
Yeah.
What, you're telling me I'm going to sing with a 60-piece orchestra, not just a pianist and a trio?
Yeah.
And in order to then have backing singers, I went to the then producers of Friday Night, which is Alan Boyd and Ruth Beasley, and they suggested the Stephen Hill Singers.
Okay.
And the Stephen Hill Singers, I didn't realise, but at that time they'd really only just started themselves. But I went to meet Stephen, and he was very cooperative. Whatever I said, he seemed to say, yes, don't worry, we'll sort it out. Asked me all sorts of important questions I didn't know the answers to, but booked him for that show.
Yeah.
They turned up, were fantastic, and that started a relationship that lasted 40 years.
Wow, amazing. And those singers were sight singing singers, aren't they, where they can sing music?
They readers is the word. Much better musicians than I am.
Right.
They morphed into, or they became Capital Voices, which was run by Annie Skates and is still run by Annie Skates. And Annie was one of those singers who was already there.
Right, yes.
And all of those people I've occasionally used elsewhere. Lance Ellington, who went on to be in Strictly.
I don't think he's got his dukedom yet.
No, he hasn't quite got his dukedom yet. But there are people who came through those singers and through Annie's singers.
Right, yeah.
So you know that you've got a really reliable core background. You've got fantastically professional orchestra, fantastically professional backing singers.
Yeah.
All you got to do is get a soloist,
Yeah.
and you're there.
Fantastic. Tell me about working with Parky, for example, who, we've all learnt about interview techniques, including me. What was it like working with him?
Well, initially it was very intimidating. So I was asked to produce him because he was very unhappy with his current team, and the principal reason was that he wanted to play jazz.
Right. Yes,
he did not want to play the Radio 2 playlist.
No.
Now, I'm pretty sure that the controller at the time, Jim Moyer, had said, absolutely, Michael, we want you, therefore play your kind of music. But I'm also convinced that as soon as Michael went out the door and the executive producer came in, Jim probably said, look, he's got to play the playlist.
Yeah.
And those two things were never going to meet. And eventually there was a big bust up, and Michael said, I'm not doing this unless we get this sorted out.
Okay.
So I was invited to go to lunch, and I was pretty, Michael was a considerable journalist, and he didn't suffer fools. And we sat down in the restaurant, and I can remember thinking, and I'd done my homework, and I thought, well, I'll come up with some interesting people we might interview. Really wasn't interested in who we might interview. He knew about that. What he wanted to know was, did the producer who was sitting in front of him know anything about the music? And of course I did, because I'd done David Jacobs.
Yeah.
So all that Great American Songbook stuff,
Yeah,
I knew.
that worked, yeah.
And it once I'd got through that, he understood that I understood about the music. It was great. And over the years, he softened. I mean, I knew him right up until he died, and he became a friend after that. And it was a complete education.
How did you persuade him?
How did I persuade him?
Yeah, to go to playlist.
Well, we were talking about music, and funnily enough, to bring Duke Ellington back into the conversation, there is a quote that Michael came up with, and Duke Ellington said that there are only two types of music, good and bad. And that gave me the opportunity to say, well, is there any contemporary artists who you would consider good? And in actual fact, there were a lot. And it went from the Beatles to Paul Simon to Fleetwood Mac to, there were a whole range of people,
Amazing. Stevie
Wonder, And I began to think, okay, so if I build these programs by hand, I can do jazz, contemporary jazz, and both ends would meet together. So that's how I solved that problem in the end.
Genius.
Genius.
Tell me about Barry Manilow, because you worked with him for years, didn't you?
I did. I did 40 programs with Barry, and a Hyde Park, and the Olivier Awards originally. Well, in a way, he's another one that, it's obviously quite intimidating to go and meet somebody like that.
Well,
whatever you might think of his music, he's a global megastar, and they live a different life. And it came through a guy called Lewis Carney, who was then head of talent at Radio 2, and it was initially going to be a Christmas show, just Barry Manilow's choice of Christmas music. So I went out to LA, met him, and we recorded the program, and he's a really detailed person.
Oh, right.
He's very, very specific. So what I had thought would take us an hour to record, we were just recording the links, we weren't mixing it there. It took us 3 hours, and we'd done an hour and we recorded one link.
Wow.
And I was thinking, okay, this is going to take a long time.
Yeah.
We took a break, and in the break, he had a fag outside on the hotel room balcony, and I was just chatting, and I suggested, why don't we do a series about the Great American Songbook, where he would illustrate at the piano. So you basically have a Great American songwriter, contemporary, talking about the Great American Songbook, Gershwin, Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, and the illustrating at the piano. And he loved that idea.
Wow.
He just loved that idea.
Yeah. Clever.
And he's funny. He's self-deprecating and funny. And I'm tempted to do the accent, but I probably shouldn't, but I will.
Go on.
Hey, Anthony, that sounds great. Let's do it. Now listen, once I'm in, I'm in. And I thought, well, okay, but, what's not to like?
That's good.
So the next time around, we did a lot of work on that first series, and I went out there for 2 weeks to record it with him.
Wow,
at his house. I mean, there are loads. I don't know how much time you've got. There are loads of Barry Manilow stories.
Well, they're in the book.
They're in the book. Yeah,
they're in the book, everybody. Okay, there's lots of photos in the book as well. So
Yes.
Tell me about those. There's a whole history of photos in the middle of the book here.
Well, I guess what you'd expect. So they're people I've worked with, me as a kid growing up, and some of them are illustrative of just what we were trying to do. So in order to answer this budget question, the budget being reduced every year and every year, I started the idea of selling tickets. And there's one or two photographs in there which I think prove the point. So it's the London Coliseum, where we'd sold tickets. We were featuring Gregory Porter, so how hard was it to sell the tickets? Not that hard, I guess.
No.
But the place was packed, rammed. Well, that was an illustration of the point that we could make them pay. Now, we didn't make any profit out of them. We just broke even. But nevertheless, we were able to do those shows at that scale.
Yeah.
And actually, having now left, I realised what a privilege that was. Because any other commercial, this is why you don't see many commercial producers doing it with 60-piece orchestras. It just costs too much money.
Yeah.
You might get 24 or 35. You're more likely to get 12 or 8 or 4.
What do you think the future is, with AI and other ways of making music and everything? Do you think that technology is going to replace orchestras and singers, particularly?
No, I don't, actually. I think that's an interesting thing. I think you can get an AI sound of an orchestra. After all, you can buy a sampler program now if you're a composer, which is sampled by the London Symphony Orchestra, so you press a key and you can hear their strings playing that note.
Yeah.
But there is something human about interpretation, which an AI would really struggle to do.
Okay.
So I think we're pretty safe, and it's the same with the singers. You will get AI singers, and they sound pretty good, but they're never going to be able to flex, bend with the music, interpret. They're never going to be able to do interviews.
No.
You can have an AI do an interview for a job that will go through a few things like, tell me about your education, but it can't do what you and I are doing now.
No.
Michael used to talk about an interview being a consenting act between two adults in public.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. And there's other communication going on between you and I other than just what we're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Body movement, eye contact, all the rest of it. AI can't do that.
No.
And I don't see a place where it will be able to do that.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can live alongside each other.
Okay, yeah, that's a good answer. And I concur. Let's fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
We're on the same boat.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any particular story in your book that sort of that's funny and that you would like to talk about? I know there's a lot, but any particular one?
Well, probably the Brian Blessed story is the one that comes to mind quickly, because I did 2 or 3 things with Brian, and one of them was called A Blessed Christmas, which was from his farm in Surrey. It was going to go out on Christmas Eve, live on Radio 2, and I went down there, and the first time I met him, he came lumbering up the garden. He was covered in horse spittle, 2 buckets, because he's got about 200 animals down there. His wife was alive then at Hildegard Neal, and we had a fantastic talk about, he's obsessed with climbing, and he's obsessed with being Professor Challenger and elephants, and he's a huge man. And come the day, he told me that he had lots of farming friends who were fantastic talkers, wonderful. They'll talk for England, yeah, great. So we start this program, and we're live, remember, and I'm having a whale of time, absolutely just really enjoying him. Anyway, we get to his first interviewee, and basically the interview goes, "Hello, you're Tony Lloyd, aren't you?" "Yes, I am." "Well, that's marvellous." And moving on. So we didn't, these interviews were supposed to be 5 minutes each.
Right.
And my colleague in London got on the talk back, he said, "Anthony, unless you've got something else, you're going to finish about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You've got 1 record left in about 20 minutes live." So I looked and I thought, crikey, yeah, we've hurtled through this thing. So I said to Brian, "Look, we're going to have to fill." And he's an actor, so I was thinking it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
We're going to have to fill. We'll come out of the record. I'll point at you. Just tell me what we're looking at. Describe where we are while I think about what we're going to do. And what we were looking at was a huge lake where he has these koi carp, and then the hills rolling down his farm. So there was things to describe. Anyway, I hear the music going, chink, 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 it fades out, and I go, and he froze. he just froze, like he was on the dead zone of Everest, which he'd been telling me about,
Right.
nothing. Now remember, this is supposed to be presented by Brian on his own. It's Brian Blessed's show. There's nobody else. But I had no choice. So all of a sudden I kind of sidled in and went, "So, Brian,
It became the interviewer.
what are we looking at?" Still nothing. There's his great head, and his beard resting on his chest. I think on the radio you could hear this heavy breathing. And then all of a sudden he just went, "Carp!" And I said, "Oh, what kind of a koi? Very tricky, herons." And thank God he thawed and he was off.
And then it was off, yeah. That's great.
And then,
It must have been nerve-wracking because it was live.
it was kind of nerve-wracking, but it was kind of fun as well.
Yeah.
And I can remember giving a Christmas anthology to Hildegard and saying, find a poem. We're going to go down to the shed where he had the donkeys and all the rest of it to do another poem.
Yeah.
And then I'll come back and we can do that. So I was making it up as I went along. Went down to the shed and I said, "It'll be great. Look, we'll do what's it called? The Magi or whatever it's called. Can't remember the name of the poem now. Anyway, get in there, give Brian the book, and I'm holding the mic, right? And Brian has a slight problem with his eyesight. He's a bit short-sighted. So he started to read, and he began to do this. He was getting lower and lower and lower. So I was having to follow him down lower and lower and lower with the microphone. And we were basically on the floor by the time we'd finished. I mean, he was completely hysterical.
Brilliant.
I loved it. I loved it.
So this book is out now. I've read it. You can get it in audio format as well.
Yes.
Are you going to write another one, or is everything in here?
Well, excuse me, coughing. I don't know is the simple answer to that. I think everything is kind of in there. I hope it's not, and then I did. I've tried to reflect the times and other things that were going on. And, mostly in broadcasting, similar things, the race against time happens again. So there are other stories that are just not in there,
Right.
Which I've thought about afterwards and thought, why didn't I put that in? But I'm not sure there's another whole book in there. So, and you can't escape it. It's on the ebook, it's on Amazon, it's on, paper.
Everywhere.
So I think for the moment that's probably it, unless I'm suddenly moved to...
Well, maybe in another 10, 20 years' time, you'll have more stories to tell.
Another 10 or 20 years, maybe.
There you go, you see. Thank you very much for talking to me about Crumpled Trumpet.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Brilliant.
Thanks very much.
Nice to see you. We're outside Sergio's in Great Titchfield Street. I think we should go inside Sergio's now.
Yeah, well, Sergio's features in the book 2 or 3
yes,
times.
He does. Thanks again. Cheers.
Okay, thank you.